Thank you, Celine. So I'm hoping that this will be fairly discussion-oriented as opposed to a big lecture on sustainability. One of the initial things I would like to do is have each of you go around and just tell who you are and what your interest or knowledge of the sustainability arena is. But first, let me just introduce myself a little bit. Like most people with pursuing passions, I'm passionate about the startup that I'm in out of UW. Soluxtra is out of Alex Jen's lab in materials science. And we're plugging along really well with a couple of phase 2 DoD contracts and a new phase 1. We make flexible, lightweight solar materials. One of the projects is for satellites, microsatellites. And the other one is for the Navy for portable solar for soldiers, but obviously also commercial applications. And then the other phase 2 project is also polymer materials, flexible, but electro-optics, so for very fast energy efficient switching. When you go from optical cables with your YouTube video coming to your house, and then it has to translate into your modem and your TV. It goes into electronic signals, and that slows it down and it gives off heat. And so you can imagine that home electronics it's much compounded in the problem of data centers as well. So our materials are materials that can be adopted into the new designs for communications and optical semiconducting. So that's one hat, and I have those cards here. And then I'm talking today more from the nonprofit that I run. I'm the executive director of Sustainable Seattle, and it's a local nonprofit that's been around since 1991. It was founded by Richard Conlon, who has been on the city council for many years, and several others in Seattle. It was founded in 1989. The Brundtland Commission came out in DC, came out with data that clearly showed that society was using a lot more resources than they were replenishing, and that we would hit a wall in terms of energy and raw material resources. And so there was a nonprofit group based in DC called Global Tomorrow, and they came out to Seattle and gave a public talk, and there were several people in the audience who heard this talk and saw these data, and they afterward were so passionate about it. There was a group of about 20 of them that wanted to continue and actually do something. So Richard Conlon was part of that group, and he worked at the Metro Y at the time, and they decided that they would just start meeting voluntarily at the Y and try to decide the first thing they wanted to do is to figure out what to look at in the community to decide if we were getting better or worse in terms of our sustainability. So they spent about 2 years looking at different indicators, everything from social indicators like how fair access to grocery stores, to access to jobs, to the environmental pollution, to energy use. So they mapped out these indicators, and the first set of indicators, they published a report that described those indicators and what a community should measure to see if they were getting worse or better. And that report sold 2,500 copies worldwide. So the organization got fairly famous because we were the first community-based organization and the first to show people a path of action where they could start doing something. So the group did a follow-on report over the next 2 years. In '95, they published the second report that had a few modifications and a little bit more elaboration, and that one sold 4,500 copies worldwide. So that's the claim to fame of this organization. I still get visitors from international locations who want to get more sustainability, community-based activities going. So I get them coming to visit us and to find out more about our history and how that happened. So over the years, Sustainable Seattle has done various kinds of projects, and we, in the late 1990s, continued to do sustainability indicator reports, but by that time it had taken off, and a lot of people were using our 95 report, or it was moving into the academic realm or the government realm. And then in the mid-2000s, we got a big Sloan Foundation grant and did a lot of community work in various neighborhoods in Seattle, so to actually measure indicators and make improvements in the neighborhoods. And then 2008 happened, the grant ran out, and so the organization really went through kind of a panic attack and redefinition of what they were trying to do. And one of the people who was an advisor on the board or involved pretty heavily at the time was Laura Musikansky. And so she came in and decided, well, you know, we can't close the organization. Number one, the job is far from done. And two, if we did, someone else would just start a Sustainable Seattle. So we might as well try to do something with it. So she revived the organization, put a lot of she's very visionary and very entrepreneurial, put a lot of energy into it and got the programs going now that we have taken off with. And then she also started a program called the Happiness Initiative. And that program got a lot of international attention, and so we ended up spinning that off into its own nonprofit, and she now runs the Happiness Initiative. But so meanwhile, then they turned to me to be executive director. I was an entrepreneur in residence at UW at the time, and as you all know, these university things can take a while to work their way through, so I thought, whatever, I'll do this part-time. But it's, of course, turns out to be a lot more than just a part-time endeavor. It's this is an era where sustainability is just taking off into the mainstream, where social media allows people to share information when they see a company doing something they don't like, and there's the whole carrot mob mentality where people want to actually take action for or against what companies are doing. And so it's an exciting time to be involved in sustainability or environmental or social business aspects, because a lot wider swath of the population cares. So that's how I got involved, and since I took over, we've grown our grant funding by 3 times. We have 4 times as many members on our email list. Our Twitter has grown from like 300 to 3,500. So people are interested, and that's really exciting. And it's been great for our organization. I've built out the board from 7 people to we're now 16 people, and a lot of people who are very well connected in local companies, so that they can help us as an organization in Sustainable Seattle be more impactful at a larger scale, and so that we can have people in those companies who are advocating for sustainability. So Elizabeth asked me to talk about sustainability because she comes from the life science sector, and if any of you are in the life science sector, you know that it's very disposable oriented, because you don't want disease spreading from patient to patient. And so there's a lot of waste. And she's been pretty passionate about getting sustainability as a topic into local biotech companies and the medical industry. And then we also have Virginia Mason that has taken a great strides towards sustainability and lean management. And so they've set the bar higher too in terms of caring about the environment and sharing with the world some of the best practices. So Elizabeth thought that it would be nice for me to talk about sustainability, and I jumped at it because if you're going to think about your energy, water, or social footprint or what you're doing, the best time to do it is at the very beginning. Because once you go down a certain path, you've invested a certain amount of research dollars, or you've built an organization with a certain culture, it's really hard to change that path without regulations coming in and making you do it, or without a big turnover in culture, which is very difficult to do. And the other reason I'm excited to bring the topic up and make sure that you all have it on your radar is it's a great business opportunity. People really do care about this. Businesses, if their customers don't care, they care, because it results in costs for them. They end up with more charges due to their environmental effluence and lost time because of worker health, because of toxics they're working with. And so there are all kinds of great stories of people who decide to put on an environmental hat, and it's just a win-win financially and environmentally. If you're interested in following the news and getting some emails that keep you generally informed, I highly recommend Greenbiz, GREENBIZ.com. I went to a conference last year that they sponsor. They sponsor these big conferences all around the world. And I went to one down in San Francisco last year, and it was really great. They had representatives from the reinsurance industry talking about how the impacts on businesses and on infrastructure due to increased storms because of climate change, and just the impacts in business in general and CO2 emissions are now impacting their insurance rates. So that helps businesses wake up to the fact that they may need to look at more efficient operations in order to bring their insurance rates down, and where they locate their plants. If it's going to possibly be in a 50-year floodplain because climate change is leading to rising seas, then insurance is now all about forward-looking prediction. And so that was really interesting. And then also they had components about sustainability reporting. More and more companies now have sustainability reports, and they're actually quite meaty. They have lots of information in there, from everything from how they treat employees to what they do in their communities to what their carbon footprint is. And many of them are looking at ways to make them more readable to the general public, because right now there's groups like investor groups. We have a guy coming in, a high-up analyst guy named Bennett, forgetting his last name, but he's from Calvert Funds. And Calvert has focused on environmentally responsible, socially responsible investing for many years. So they have the largest number of analysts focused on sustainability-related investments of any of the big investment firms. So will be sponsoring a talk when he comes into town in May. So you can watch, you'll see that on the Sustainable Seattle website when we know when that date is. But so it's investor-driven, insurance-driven, legal-driven, customer-driven, and efficiency-driven. What most people have found is if they look at just their general operations, even if they don't change their source of energy or the water source that they're using, if they actually look at their process and think about making it more efficient, they have made dramatic changes. IBM made dramatic changes in their semiconductor processing some years ago, and now they have a consulting arm that teaches other semiconductor firms how to go about that, because it's a very water-intensive process normally. I have some colleagues at CH2M Hill, which is an big international engineering firm, and they have a number of projects that they've done for clients, and typically it will be the set of people on the projects will be 5 or 7 people, and they'll know what was accomplished and the benefits, but they haven't had an avenue to talk to more people about what those benefits are, what kind of approach to take. And so we're starting a workshop series where they'll have an opportunity to talk to larger groups about what these projects are. So lots of exciting things going on, and if you're interested in specifics, I urge you to look into those. But the other thing is, if you consider your packaging or your disposable versus recyclable type things up front, it can help you over a hurdle that companies are, if you plan on being bought by a company downstream, then it'll be one less thing they'll have to worry about themselves. And so it might be the thing that clinches a deal for you. If you are using nasty solvents and they want to scale that up and they're going to have to deal with that, how to recycle those solvents and capture those, it's very expensive. And a lot of them they're not even able to use. So it's to your advantage to do some research up front or talk to companies about the threats and the changes that they see coming so that you are addressing it, and it can be another selling point for what you're doing. So anyway, let's move to the slides. So Sustainable Seattle, we have 3 main programs, 4 actually, most recently, but we just had our Sustainability Leadership Awards in the end of January. We had a big event at Mohi, and it was really fun. We get nominations from the community, everything from businesses. Last year, Alaska Airlines was a winner. A company called Grid Mobility was a winner. That was a startup company. And community groups, individuals, an individual who started a community kitchen was a winner. So we get nominations from the community, and then we have judging teams that are also community members. So it's a very fun event, but it's also really meaningful because the types of things people do to go out of their way to make the world a better place often just don't get recognized. So it's a fun way to engage the community and come together to celebrate. And then we have our business program, which I mentioned briefly. We have workshops. We put on a climate conference in the fall. We had our first one last fall here at UW in conjunction with the business school, the Burke Center for Entrepreneurship, and it was great. We brought in a reinsurance guy from New York and a guy up from San Francisco, and had one of our leaders from Climate Solutions talk. And so the topic really was business impacts of climate change, and we covered everything from what's expected in terms of increased damage and increased risk to facilities to health impacts of climate change. So we're going to build out that conference this fall. We'll have it also probably in October, and hopefully do it in conjunction with the Climate Impacts Group here on campus, Professor Amy Snover and her group, and build it out into a full day conference, so watch for that. And then we have several grant funding sources that help us with our community-based work, and with that we're putting in rain gardens and other permeable pavers. The biggest problem we have in this region that the city and the county are focused on is pollution in the sound. So when we get these big dumps of rain like we've been having a little bit more of this winter, rather than our old Seattle drizzle, then the sewer overflows, and all that dirty water heads straight down into the sound, and the sound doesn't show the damage that it's actually incurring. So it's impacting our shellfish population. And our shellfish industry is actually huge. We ship shellfish all over the world to customers. So the marine industry is impacted, and the health of the sound in general. So it's a big push with the city and the county to install more absorptive gardens and more permeable pavers, and very simple infrastructure, not big culverts or big processing plants, but very simple infrastructure can have a huge impact. What we like about it as a community-based organization is it brings neighborhood members out. It gives them something to participate in. They get to know each other and makes that whole neighborhood more resilient. And then you can talk to them about energy improvements in their home, like caulking their windows or turning their temperature down a degree or two. Whereas if you start talking about those things, it's like, it's so boring. But you can get them out working together on a garden pretty easily. So those fun projects are a way to get people started on the sustainability path. And our latest program, we just took on the management of Green Drinks. Green Drinks is a very informal gathering that happens every month at different locations around town. A business will offer up their space to host it, and 150 to 300 people generally show up, and it's just networking, multi-age, as long as they're drinking age, because there's free beer. And so we have beer sponsors and wine sponsors, and often appetizers offered or paid for by the venue. And then there's a short speaking opportunity for the host, and they can talk about what they're doing in the area of green. And we often share that spotlight with another local nonprofit. So that has been going for 10 years. And the guy who started that and has grown it up to be such a great opening spot for people to come into sustainability, Gabriel Scheer, he just handed that off to Sustainable Seattle to take on the management of that. So our goal as an organization is to be very open, and anything anyone's doing or thinking about to be very celebratory about that, and not judgmental. We're not about bad business versus good business, because if any of you have worked in a large company or large organization, you know how hard it is to steer the ship a different direction. It's really hard to change cultures. So I think that our stance is that any movement toward improving the environmental footprint is great, or social impacts. Okay. So in the big picture, there's more that you'll see in the general press, but certainly if you sign up for greenbiz.com, or actually another one I wanted to let you know about is The Guardian has a sustainable business e-newsletter and a great website. And so that, coming from Europe is a few years ahead of us in terms of regulatory demands and concerns on environmental impacts. And so it's a great source of what is coming and solutions that people have come up with. So renewable energy, there are a lot of exciting business opportunities in renewable energy. I didn't hear any of you working in batteries or those types of things, although with Xiaoyi Zhang's technology for the biofouling prevention, with ships, the problem when they're sitting in the ocean or the sound is that algae, barnacles, everything attaches, and they're so determined that it's really difficult to keep them from attaching. So Xiaoyi has a technology that may help with that. And the side benefit is it drastically improves the fuel use of the ships if they prevent fouling, because that creates a lot of drag. And so there's a huge environmental benefit of just preventing the fouling. So renewable energy is an opportunity. Water is coming very, very big opportunity. It's been in the news this year because California's had a big drought. Not only that, but worldwide, the main cause of disease is polluted water, polluted drinking water. So simple solutions, like we have a company out in Redmond called Helionics, I think it is the name of it, and they have some water filtration technology that's applicable in the third world as well as in the hospitals and other areas like that. Toxics, there's a interesting story. Our offices, Sustainable Seattle, we're in some co-work shared desk space on the 4th floor of the Bullitt Center. And the Bullitt Center, that's another one if you are interested in coming to visit that building. It's the greenest commercial building that in the world so far. 6 stories high, all composting toilets, high tech though. It's not like going camping. And it's a gorgeous building. The temperature is automatically monitored and maintained. It's in the summer I tend to work there really late because it's like working on your front porch. Very fresh air, and the shades come down on their own to keep the light just right and the temperature just right. And we have solar panels on the roof of the building. It's in Capitol Hill, and so it's a net zero energy and net zero water. Capture all of our water from the rainwater, and starting. I think that they have enough people filling the building now that they'll be able to start the Living Building Challenge, which is a 1-year monitoring cycle in order to be officially called a living building. So it cost about 25% more to build that building than it would have a regular building, but we don't have any energy bills. We're not going to have any water bills, and it's a 250-year lifespan that it's been designed for, and a 9.2 earthquake that it can withstand. And so you can't tell me that that's not cost effective. So it's, they did all the work. It was funded by the Bullitt Foundation and a few other funders, but they did all the work to vet the materials that the building is made of. And to me, that's one of the more, I'm a materials person, so that's one of the more amazing parts of the story. If you come on the tour, they have tours most days offered at 4 p.m. You'll be able to go down into the basement too, and it's its own water district. We have our own filtration systems for the water, and then it's having captured it, and then it comes up into our sinks. And so you'll get to see all that water filtration system, and then understand more about the materials. So in the building industry, you're from the building industry, there's a red list of toxic materials that are still pervasive in our typical building designs. It's about 360 things on that list, I believe. And the Bullitt Center, being trying to meet the Living Building Challenge, was to avoid all of those 360 buildings. So many things have vinyl in them. Vinyl's out. Just the list is long of different kinds of paints. So the developers of the Bullitt Center went through all of the different materials and carefully chose all the different materials for the building, and came pretty close to avoiding all of the red listed materials. And the interesting story was they have panels on the outside of the building. Those panels needed to be sealed, so it's like a clear paint. And they couldn't find a single company that made a sealant without a nasty plasticizer in it. But they went around asking, and then about 2 months after they did this whole asking all around the world, they got a call from a local company that said, I think we've got something for you. We really want to be part of this building. And so we got to work on it, and we have some material that we want you to test. And so they did the tests, and it passed, and it's great material, and they got rid of all of their plasticizer that they were using, and now they make completely non-toxic sealant materials. So that now they have created a whole new market for themselves. And that's the same with the windows. One of the criteria for the Living Building Challenge is that all the materials need to come from within 350 miles of the building. And the windows that they wanted are these large floor-to-ceiling windows that will self-ventilate. So depending on whether the building needs air or not, they'll open up. But they open up in a scissors fashion, so they'll open up straight out rather than like a doorway, because this kind of opening will tend to lose its seal after a pretty short amount of time because of the weight when the window is open. So they wanted the kind that open out flat. And the only place that they could find that made them was a place in Germany, and that was where they were manufactured. So what they ended up doing was brokering a deal between a window company in Everett, that's a high-end window company, and Germany, and they ended up licensing the German technology, and now they're making those windows, and it's opened up this whole American market for the German company. So all these great stories, if you have a will, then you can create a much better than expected way. Okay, another thing driving, when I mentioned the Guardian, another thing driving the change is European companies and regulations won't let our products in unless they meet certain criteria. So if you're talking about a 3M, or you're talking about a GE, or any of these companies that sell internationally, they end up having to meet higher requirements if they want to sell in other countries anyway. And Nike found out many years ago that having transparency in their labor practices can greatly impact their business. So that completely changed their tune. And now Nike is a leader in using sustainable materials, taking their products back and recycling, lessening packaging, and all kinds of things. And then Walmart, of course, they still have their issues as a truly nice business, but they did step up to the plate and demand that all the way down their supply chain, suppliers report their carbon footprint and the materials that they're using, and that quickly forced the wider world to pay attention to those types of things. And that, that's a case where they still do a lot of things well worth complaining about, but many steps in the right direction. So even the icons, just this last month, McDonald's announced that it's going to begin purchasing verified sustainable beef. And so they're going to have trouble sourcing enough beef to feed all McDonald's customers, but they've stepped up to the plate and they really want all of their beef to be sustainably sourced. So that's going to be a huge change for the beef industry. So most beef is feedlot beef, so it'll be cattle that aren't turned out into grass fields at all. They're just kept in these stinky, muddy, if you've ever driven kind of out in the country and smelled the cows. It's not a healthy way to grow beef. And then because they're in a really closed environment, they're very susceptible to disease. So they're fed antibiotics on in their food constantly. So there's antibiotics, and there's also hormones. They feed them hormones to pump them up more quickly so that they get fat quicker.
They're called CAFOs, concentrated animal feeding operations, and they're mostly on the coast of California. You go by, and they have no space in between.
It's not like an animal at all. It's
going out in the country and seeing cows grazing.
So if you go to the grocery store and you see grass-fed beef, I would highly recommend, both for taste and for just plain good for the earth and good for the critter, to buy grass-fed beef. It's a whole different kind of operation. So anyway, yeah, it's good for McDonald's. They stepped up to the plate and stopped using so much styrofoam, and now they want to go with sustainable beef. And many other companies too. Interface Carpet, this is another one. If you're motivated to learn more, look up Ray Anderson on YouTube, Interface Carpet. He was in the mid-90s, he kind of saw the light of how horrible the carpet industry was in terms of its waste. Using a lot of toxic materials up front, a lot of anti-stain coatings were pretty nasty, and then when the carpet was used and old, people would take it out, and it's a huge problem in dumps because it's so high in volume. So a woman who worked with him, she reported to him, her name is Joyce Lavelle. She had a daughter who was going to University of Wisconsin at the time and took a course on environmental business or something like that, read Paul Hawken's book, and blanking on which one of Paul Hawken's books it was in the early 90s, but her daughter brought that book home and said, "Mom, you should give this to Ray," who was the CEO of Interface. And so Joyce thought, oh, I have to buy my time there. And somehow Ray got asked to give a talk about what his company was doing pertaining to the environment. And so Joyce put the book on his desk so that she could help get him prepared, and he started reading the book, and he was just fascinated. I don't know if you've read any of Paul Hawken's books, but he's like a poet. He's an amazing writer. And so Ray read that book, and he just thought, wow, in the future, people like me who are doing all this pollution, we're going to go to jail. We have to change things. And so go to YouTube and listen to his talk. He's passed away now. He passed away last year, the year before. Quite an amazing guy, but he really saw the light, and he became very passionate about it. And this is probably Interface Carpet. It's carpet squares, and so if a square wears out, with Interface Carpet, you just replace the square rather than having to replace the whole thing. And so his company was one of the first big old industry companies, textile company in the South, that started to make these changes and stand up for this. But now we have many companies. Unilever is going gangbusters. I mean, it's a huge conglomerate, and they're trying to drive all of their products toward more sustainable materials and sustainable manufacturing. Starbucks, they're worried about their coffee plantations and the fair labor practices for where they buy their coffee, but with climate change, it's expected that the farmers are going to have to move further up the mountain to get the right temperatures for raising their coffee beans. So they're concerned about that land use with their farmers. Outer Wall, it's a local company. They own Coinstar and Redbox. So it was Coinstar, they bought Redbox, and now they just rebranded, called Outer Wall. Fantastic company, doing a lot of things to reuse parts. All of their used Redbox machines or Coinstar machines go to Total Reclaim, and all the parts get recycled or refurbished and made into new machines. So it's pretty amazing. Nike, I mentioned earlier, and Nordstrom, they don't make a big deal about being green or sustainable, but they actually are doing a lot and trying to do more fair sourcing of their materials and things. And then Patagonia stands up for it, as you may all know. DuPont and the other chemical companies have been at this for a long time because they saw that it was going to start costing them, and other reasons as well. They saw the markets opening up for more non-toxics. And then Microsoft's been doing a lot of great things in the past 3 years, especially, I would say. They have a really cool program where they charge their internal managers a carbon tax. So if you're running a division in Microsoft and you're using a certain amount of energy, or your people are flying all over the country at meetings, all that gets added up into the amount of carbon that you are generating, and your division gets charged for that. So you have to pay out to the company for that carbon that you're using. So there's a built-in incentive for them to use less carbon there. And the manager, I've talked to the manager who implemented that program, and she got that idea because City of Vancouver up in Canada does that. They have implemented the carbon tax, and it's driven their carbon footprint way down. Okay. Recently I met with a guy, and he and many others are wanting to start a green bank in Washington State. Other states have a green bank, and the purpose of the green bank is basically to provide upfront financing for things that would be of great benefit to businesses and cities and such, but the money, it's hard to get the money to do it upfront at good cost. So it would be partially public funded and partially privately funded. I think that will happen because it seems to be working really well, and Hawaii and Connecticut and several other states have green banks in the works. And so this is my last slide. Washington State has a newly minted climate plan, and they're starting to have meetings about that. Seattle has a climate action plan, and there's talk in the next year or two of having a local carbon tax implemented in this region. So all of those things might impact your future businesses. So things to pay attention to.
Well, thank you, Terri.
Yes.
And thank you, everyone, for coming.